You have to have faith in what is happening. You've got to connect to God and to your own power and own strength and love to really stand up against people who are not knowing.
You're listening to the No Labels, No Limits podcast with best-selling author Sarah Box. We focus on the mantra, no labels, no limits, no excuses. And now, without further ado, please welcome your commanding coach with plenty of chutzpah and heart, Sarah Box.
Hey there, No Labels, No Limits podcast listeners. Welcome back. I'm Sarah Box, your host of the No Labels, No Limits podcast, where we are on a mission to help individuals, teams, and organizations think outside the box and move beyond limiting beliefs and labels, all so they can have a profound impact in the lives of others and honestly in our own lives. And we do this by sharing amazing and accomplished individuals, speakers, authors, all kinds of people are out in the world. And today I'm excited to introduce to a truly remarkable guest, Michael Ruskin. Now, Michael has a long story. He's got a long arc, but we're going to focus in on a slice of it. So I'm going to just give you some background on him. He was born in Brooklyn, New York. He is the son of the late David and Dora Ruskin and brother of late Alan Ruskin. And you will see the importance of that as we go into our conversation. He grew up in central New Jersey. New Jersey, woo, I put an extra H in there. Now, he attended Kent State University in Ohio and graduated with a BA in psychology and political science. And his career as a human resource consultant had him supporting corporations from around the world. And that has a tie into how he came in to be in different places around our country and have different experiences. He is a frequent guest on many podcasts, both in the U.S. and overseas, and he presents on his parents' story and keeping their legacy alive. And that's going to be the focus of this conversation today. And you'll understand why. He is the last surviving member of his immediate family. He says his book, The Vow, A Love Story, and the Holocaust, is the child he never had. And he's on a mission to carry on his parents' legacy, break intergenerational shackles, and spread the message that God is the prescription for staying alive. He currently resides in Alpharetta, Georgia. So now let me officially welcome Michael Ruskin to the podcast. Hi, Michael.
Hi, Sarah. I'm glad to be here. I'm glad to meet your audience.
I'm glad to share you with our audience. So I want to dive right into legacy and writing. And you say your book is The Child You Never Had, and it's a part of preserving your parents' legacy. What do you mean by that?
It's interesting. I'm glad you brought up as the first topic. There's a tie-in between my legacy and my parents' legacy, because as you mentioned, I never had family, and my legacy will be this book. Rather than having a child that will grow up and take over the DNA that I gave to them, it's going to be that book, because to me, my parents left us with a very special and spiritual message. And I believed it was up to me to fulfill that by writing this book and delivering their story, which they never spoke about. And I believe that basically I'm on a mission to be their voice, because, when I was younger, my brother and I tried to get them to go onto a tape recorder and have it recorded. They did not want to do that. In fact, Sarah, there were times when I was very young, 6, 7 years old, before I went out to play, my mother would say to me, "Don't tell anyone in the neighborhood that we're refugees. No one needs to know this." And I couldn't understand why. But now as older, there was probably the fact they didn't want to feel that they weren't assimilating into the community, or they felt guilt that their families on both sides perished, including my sister, and they were guilt because they were still alive.
Yeah.
but they were very closed. And a lot of the information I got was from the documents I found, which is a really interesting story. In 1993, when my father passed away, I went down to Miami Beach from New York with my brother. And after the funeral was over, my brother and I decided that we were going to go ahead and sell the condominium in the South Beach. So one night I went over there to start cleaning up the condo, getting ready for the real estate people to come in. And as I went to his bedroom and I went to his night table, I found a manila folder, and in there were documents that were written by the attorneys and the doctors that were petitioning the German courts in 1964 for reparations for the loss of my sister and my grandparents on both sides of the family, and my aunts and uncles, because I have no family. And so there it is.
So did you know you'd had a sister?
Oh, yes. My mother mentioned this once, Sarah, a long time ago. It was around Passover. I remember she said, "You know, you had a sister, don't you?" And I just didn't say anything. And I didn't really press her on this because I was already an adult, and I didn't want to open up the wounds about who she was and what happened. A lot of this information I found out by finding those documents in my father's night table in 93. And so there I am, 11 o'clock at night, reading in German and in English all what happened to my parents. They never spoke about it until I found those documents. And I was just blown away. My heart went into my feet. It was the chilling things that I read about what the Germans did to my family was just unbelievable. So that became the nucleus of the book.
So let's go back and introduce us to the persons of David and Dora. Because when I read about them, you bring them alive, like how it was to be them, their spirits, like their life force spirits. So give us a taste of your parents before they were your parents.
Okay, my mother they were from the country of Lithuania. My mother was from a country called Mažeikiai, and my father was from Kėdainiai. They were about an hour apart. My grandfather was a very prominent rabbi in the town that my mother and my aunts and uncles came from. My mother was one of 9 children. She was the third oldest. And my grandfather was very well known in the Jewish community. It wasn't a large, it was called a shtetl. It was a very small area. But he was very well liked by the community. And the children were modeled, my aunts and uncles and my mom were model kids. They went to the temple and they Friday night Sabbath, and was a very conservative household. My mother was a little precocious. I mean, she would get into trouble from what I remember from I got a lot of this information also from my aunt in Tel Aviv, but she was a precocious kid. She was very smart. She spoke 6 languages by the time she got into college, which became very handy because, well, I'll go into it a little bit later. But anyway, so she was very smart. She was very well liked. She hung around with, the kids, and she got into trouble like everybody else did. But I come from a line of rabbis, not only my grandfather, but it goes to a long line of rabbinic scholars that go back to the czars of Russia in the 1800s in Russia and Poland. And so I come from that kind of background. My father, they were very well off, opposed to my father, who came from a very poor family. My grandfather, and I'm named after my father's father, which, by the way, my real name is Meyer Ruskin. It's not Michael Ruskin. It was changed it wasn't changed. It was actually, I don't know what happened. My birth certificate had my Hebrew name. But anyway, so my grandfather had a haberdashery. He got involved in making gloves and scarves and hats. And they had an apartment on the 2nd floor, and they had a little store on the bottom of the building. And that's how my grandfather made a living. And my father ended up helping out in the store with my aunt, my father's sister. And then when my brother was in his teens, my grandfather passed away. So it was only my grandmother, Minna, and Rose, my aunt, and my brother that ran the store. They were very, very poor people. my father ended up becoming a handyman because he was very good at electricity. So he'd go around the neighborhood fixing electrical equipment in the neighborhood, and he became like a handyman. He was just in high school. All right, so you can see the contrast right there between a rich family and a poor family. And the whole book is a book of contrast between the light and the darkness, between the evil and the good, between the enslavement and the freedom, and the life and death. This whole book is based on spirituality. And when I tell people in the beginning, I think, oh, it's another book on the Holocaust. Right from the beginning, Sarah, I wanted this book to people to understand this is a spiritual book. And when I make my presentations to an audience, I say that right out in the front. It's a spiritual book. It's the strength of the human spirit and the power of love, which was what kept them alive.
So let's talk about the spiritual aspect of that a little more deeply, Michael, because I've listened to you on other interviews where you talk about it being spiritual plus a metaphysical experience, yes, and having a download when you were writing the book. What was that like, and how did that happen for you?
Boy, does that that opens up a big topic here.
Go right down there.
Yeah. Well, all right. So let me just back up real quick. So when my brother passed away in 2008, he was only 58 years old. He passed away from hepatitis C, which if you trail back to, he had an operation in the displacement camp in Munich, Germany in 46, and they used unsterilized instruments, and he had tainted blood in his system. So he ended up dying in 2008, and I became the last surviving member of my immediate family. And again, I want to remind you, at this point, I already had those documents. Those documents I already had. And so when he passed away and I realized that I was the last one to know and my brother really didn't go into a real big thing about finding these documents in the night table. He was kind of stoic. He just kind of brushed it off. But I knew that their story was absolutely incredible. So then I began starting to write the book a number of years later, and I can't tell you why. I guess I had moved to another apartment, and I found those documents in my desk drawer somehow, and I decided I would write the book. And it started off as an ebook, and it was not really well written, and it only stayed online for a couple of months. But interestingly enough, there was a man in South Africa who I found out later was my first cousin. He was a Lithuanian researcher, and he found this ebook on a international website that was telling stories about Holocaust survivors. And in there was a piece about my father coming from Kazan, Lithuania. And he connected the dots. He sends me an email in 2016 saying, my name is Evan Levin, and I noticed that your grandfather or your father's from Kazan. And he goes, well, my grandfather is from Kazan, and I made some research, and I believe that we're related. I didn't know who this person was. I thought he was some kind of nutcase. I just dismissed him. 2 days later, he sends me back an email with his aunt's address book. And in that address book was the address, the name, and the phone number of my parents in Florida. So when he told me about this address book, I was totally blown away. And I knew there was something there between him and I. I found out that his grandfather is my grandmother's brother. So he's really my first cousin. And by the way, I met him 3 years ago because he has a company here in Atlanta, Georgia. And I met him for dinner. And he was my friend. I have no relatives. I didn't even know that he was, until I knew I had a cousin. So we kind of reminisced, and now he lives in London, England. And through his research, I found 2 other cousins here in the States on my father's side, one in San Diego and one in New Jersey. I never knew I had relatives on my father's side.
Wow.
So he was instrumental on getting this thing started. So quickly, let me tell you what happened. He has a friend in Los Angeles who works for one of the studios, and he sent the ebook to them. And I was embarrassed because it was so poorly written. The producer in LA read the ebook, and he said, well, to make a long story short, they thought it was a great book, but they said it would cost so much money to start a film. So we said, well, unless he sells like 100,000 books, the chances of them wanting to invest in a film is not going to happen. But anyway, so we talked for a while, and then I started really getting serious about getting involved in writing their story. And that's when I started pulling together the documents, contacting the Holocaust Museum. And by the way, just to let you know, those documents are now at the Holocaust Museum Library in Washington, D.C. I donated those documents to them. And so I spoke to my cousin in Jerusalem, in Tel Aviv, and I did a lot of research on my own. And then I found a document in 1954 that was a reporter where my father worked. And my father worked as a laborer in a paint factory. I mean, when my parents came here, my mother worked as a seamstress, sewing hems on dresses.
They came here?
Yeah, when they came here from Ellis Island in 1949, they lived in Brooklyn, they moved to New Jersey. And so I found this interview that was on the company newspaper. And a lot of that is in the book, how my father had the mission of going through the countries looking for my mom, through 3 different countries looking for my mom. All this is in that interview that my father had. And people say to me, this is incredible. I mean, this can't be. And I'm telling you, it's based on fact. I got the documents, and everything I'm telling you is fact.
So his search was based on a promise he made, right?
Right. They made a vow.
What was that vow?
Yeah, the vow was when the ghetto where my sister died, they were starting to liquidate the ghetto because the Allies were moving in, both from the United States and Russia. They wanted to take the remaining people in the ghetto and move them to the concentration camps further away from where the Allies were invading. So I think it was in August or early September of 1944, my parents were moved from their apartment in the ghetto onto the train platform where they were being deported to other areas. And they were saying, and the Germans were saying, we're deporting you because we want to make sure you're safe. So they separated the men and the boys were going into one train, and the girls and the women were going into another train. And so on the train platform, my parents didn't know where they were going. They did know they were being separated. And so it was on that platform in 1944 where they made a second vow. And that vow was if either one were to live, they were to go back to Kaunas, Lithuania, to see if the other one was still alive. And so in the book, I talk about how they hugged and they said goodbye, and it was really very emotional. So my father was put on a train going to Munich, Germany, to the Dachau concentration camp. My mother was being put on a train to Stutthof, which is in northern Poland. They were going in opposite directions. No one knew and a lot died on their way to the concentration camps, like 8 to 12 hours. Inside the boxcars, there was absolutely no facilities, no room to breathe. It was all slatted wood, and they just knew they were being separated, and they didn't even know where they were going until they landed in the concentration camps. And so they made the vow that night, as I said, that day on the platform, that if they were to live, and then for the next 9 months, Sarah, they didn't know if the other one was still alive or where they even were. All they knew is here was a man she was married to already for 4 years. My sister died only 3 months before they were shipped off to these concentration camps. When you sit down and you think to yourself, how could anyone, and the way my sister was taken literally out of the arms of my mother by an SS officer because they were killing all the children. So as I was writing, as I was typing, I realized, and this is part of what I said in my book, like I would hear, and I said, this is their book, Sarah. This is their story. I'm only a messenger. I didn't write this book. They wrote this book. I stand up in front of people and I say, I'm only filling in for my parents. They should be here talking about it. I'm basically I'm the messenger in this. So I would be typing away in the middle of the night and I would hear these words coming into my head that I did not make up these. All I did was my fingers are just going across the keyboard, just letting them go as if they had a mind of their own. And then in the morning I'd wake up, I looked down at the keyboard and I couldn't believe that was me that just wrote that. And so there was so much synchronicity and so much, I could feel them around me all the time. All the time. I mean, no matter where I go, I see light sometimes in the bedroom at night. I could feel flashes of light coming into the bedroom. And so that's how that whole spiritual thing started. There was one time I remember 2:00 in the morning, I was typing and I heard this crash on my deck in my condo. And the next morning I woke up and a branch from a tree that was like 300 feet in the air, the branch of it went right down into an empty flower pot and it looked like a tree. And it was like the tree of life that they say in the Kabbalah and in Judaism. And I couldn't even pull it out of the flower pot.
It
was
stuck
so
that hard
in there. It was just incredible.
Hey there, everybody. I want to take just a minute out of this episode of the No Labels, No Limits podcast to tell you that we are officially opening the Sandbox membership in September. So if you're not already on our mailing list, please click the link below to either sign up for the membership or get on the waiting list for the membership. And if you click the link, you'll find more information about what's included, what our plans are, and better yet, you'll be on early enough to help decide what is most important to you to experience in the first 3 to 6 months of the membership. So don't wait. Click the link below and join us in the Sandbox where fun happens. We get to do a little R&R, little learning, support one another, and really grow and expand in ourselves, in our lives, and impact the world in a profound way. So come on over, join us. So this is a side question. When you see the light and feel the light in your house and around you and your parents, do you take a moment to talk with them?
All the time. All the time. First of all, I think gratitude, what really is so disturbing for me is that I didn't know who they were. I didn't know them. We would sit in the den watching World at War. It was an old document of clips of Germans taking the Jews into the concentration camp. It was a weekly TV show. And here I'm sitting in the den next to these two people. I couldn't connect what I was watching on TV with my parents to these people that were sitting next to me. And to think that if I would have known how special they were, I would have been so grateful and so honored to be their son. I never even made them understand. Now that they're gone, I want to know how much I love them. And that's one of the reasons why I wrote the book.
Your legacy.
Yeah. They wouldn't, and for me, I'm trying to get their legacy to be really, I'm going around the world with this book. And it was my intention right from the start. It was to get this around the world, and I'm getting there. I just spoke in the Ukraine about 2 months ago. I spoke in the Netherlands and Australia, and I'm doing a lot of podcasts right now. So,
how are you being received, Michael? Especially since October and all the upheaval, and how are people receiving you?
Extremely well. I mean, it's like in my Facebook page, I have 1933 Berlin, Germany, when the students at the University of Berlin were burning books in a bonfire, and the bonfire was being guarded by the SS in 1933. And it started on the college campuses in Germany. And I see the similarities between happened there to what's going on now, between what's going on in the Middle East. And what's also a spinoff is that Now I'm here to educate, especially the younger generation. I am telling you, Sarah, I use the word Holocaust. They don't even know what the word is.
Right. That's what I was going to say. When you're talking about liquidation, it occurred to my head, if you're a certain age, you know what that means. Otherwise, it sounds like a financial term. We're liquidating assets. Well, it does. It can feel very just kind of clinical, right?
Right.
We're not talking about liquidating. We're talking about wiping out people, killing people.
It's absolutely mind-boggling. And the fact is, Sarah, I'm talking about Jewish students that don't even know that much about their history. And if they would know the similarities, they would be where we can't just sit there and let this happen. We got to stand up and we got to educate. And so my goal now is to get into the schools, but it can be very controversial because you got the other side, with the Hamas and then the Palestinian thing, and it causes a lot of tension between, especially on the college campuses. So it's hard to get into the schools right now, but you still got the synagogues and you still got the Jewish center. So
I think there's also the important thing of hope that you talk about, which is what's unique about your book. It's about the horror of what your parents went through, their survival, but just their steadfast commitment to one another and to love.
Right.
Right.
And to have hope.
And to have hope.
That they have something to look forward to. But the hard part is, here it is in Dachau concentration camp, and my father doesn't know if my mom's still alive, and my mom doesn't know if my dad's still alive, but they still prayed and they still knew that vow meant everything to each other. And my father would not give up because, as I said, when he was released after he was liberated, he went through almost 2 months of being on the road looking for my mom at the displacement camps on his way back to Lithuania.
So, and I'm thinking about your spiritual connection with your parents now, right? And also there's a sense they may have felt physically the other was still alive, whether they could find him or not. I don't know if that's too out there for you, but I do believe it's like, when the connection's there, the thread's there.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it, because I come from like the quantum physics world and that sort of connection about the energy, and I think they both knew that they were still. And the way, I'm not going to go into exactly. I don't want to ruin if people buy the book, but how they ended up finding each other after the war was just incredible.
Yeah. I'm not going to talk about that either.
No, but
I'll leave it out there.
I'm going to tell you, my father was a very quiet man. My mother ran the family. My mother was really smart, but how much he loved my mom so much. And, and he was an excellent provider, but he didn't speak very much. And my mother was the one who had the voice in the family. So we listened to my mom.
So who do you take after?
I take after, I say I'm more like my father in the sense of having a very deep feelings, but I don't express them as much as I should. I am now, as I'm getting older. I'm more comfortable now speaking my truth, and so it's a lot easier now. But I would say I'm more like my dad in that sense. I'm a very I'm a very giving person. I really care. Right now, I'm working with autistic kids and I'm working with people with the elderly. So I'm a caregiver. So in addition to what I'm doing now, I'm also doing caregiving work. So anyway, so they're with me all the time, and I know when I go to bed at night that I know my angels and they're there with them. And, I know now they know how much I love them. I can't tell you, I'm working 7 days a week, like 16-hour days just to get this book because I'm self-published. I'm not going through a publisher. So I'm doing this all by myself. So
let's talk about your vision here's where it is today. Well, you're out there trying to spread the word. You're speaking on stages, podcasts. But let's say it's 2 years from now, maybe 3 years. And all of that's behind you and you have achieved what you want. What does that look like, Michael?
I don't know if I don't know if I'll ever get to a point of being achieved everything. I think I'll be doing this for the remainder of my life.
Okay, let's make it simpler. That you've reached a major milestone on where you're headed.
I would probably always be part of educating the people to what happened then and what's happening now. I think we're in a crossroads. It's a very difficult time. I obviously to me, getting a film started, having a movie that could be going on for a long time would be my ideal. But the book to me is much more important at this point. But I would always be involved in making sure my parents' legacy continues, regardless how many people know. I still want to talk about it. And I believe, honestly, people would say, I started this at I'm not exactly a spring chicken anymore, So, but I think one of the reasons I'm here was to carry on this legacy at this age. I mean, it's amazing that it's giving me the energy and the purpose. It gives me a purpose that I'm doing something for my parents.
Yeah, I wouldn't say the chronological age is defining you, because you're very energetic and focused.
Yeah, I am. Yeah.
I want to ask you a slight shift question. I was struck by the whole concept of the Germans telling your parents that they were sending them away from the ghetto to be safe. And I don't know what I was listening to at the same time or around me, but I thought, that whole concept of people trading safety for freedom, like, okay, we're going to move you away. And they're already know they're not in a safe situation. What do you think we give up for that sense of safety, Michael? What's the risk today that you see? Does that question make sense?
No, it does, and I think that's not a good place to be, because you're actually acquiescing to someone else's will, and the safety is not guaranteed. Just to back up 1 second, and I'll tell you that when the Germans invaded Lithuania, and Countess, the Germans said, no, let me back up and say this. The local Lithuanians were killing the Jews because they blamed the Jews for collaborating with the Russians. And the Russians were very oppressive to the Lithuanian people. So when the Nazis came in and kicked the Germans out, I guess very historical, kicks them back to Russia, the Lithuanians were killing the Jews wholesale. My grandparents on both sides were killed by the Lithuanians who were collaborators with the Nazis, because they thought if they killed the Jews, they would get their state back, sovereign state of Lithuania. It didn't happen. But the point is that it was the Germans that said, we're going to create a ghetto and we're going to take you, 32,000 Jews in this town. We're going to put you in the ghetto, barbed wire the ghetto, keep you in there to be safe. No, they were using that as a systematic way of killing the Jews. That's what they were doing. They had raids in the apartment buildings. That's one of the reasons my sister was taken. They would just go into the apartments and take clothes and jewelry and money and just take whatever they wanted and leave. And because they wanted the Jews in one confined area where they could be controlled. And the Jewish people said, we're going to be safe if we go into the ghetto. That was the furthest thing from safety. It was not safe.
There's something so profound about that, Michael, because that sense of someone saying, if you do this, we'll protect you, and you give up your sovereignty, your own self-agency. And it can feel initially like, oh, what a great idea. We can have a barrier. But you know what? You're on the inside as a prisoner.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But I think Jewish people today are a little bit more aware of what's going on.
I'm not talking about them. I'm talking about the rest of us.
Yeah, that's true. Right.
Because you've got a history, except for the younger ones who don't know the history, like you're trying to educate. But that goes for anything. When someone says, hey, we'll make you a separate group, and whatever the group is, and protect you. But at some point, you're so carved out of the whole group. How could you be protective?
No, you're not. Yeah. You're not. You're being singled out.
Yeah. And then the Lithuanians, right, to save themselves, killed the Jews.
Right.
So
yeah, that's what they went when the Germans arrived. My mother told me this. The Germans came in and said, "Show us the houses that the Jews lived in," because they just got into the town. They didn't know. And the Lithuanians would point to the houses, and the Germans said, "Go get your guns, your machetes, your knives, your baseball bats, or whatever." And they went in. They just killed them in their homes. As I said, that's how my grandparents on both sides died, was because the Lithuanians came in and killed them, and they were very.
So I just want to point out to the No Labels, No Limits listeners, this is not a typical episode, but this really is about not accepting limits or barriers around us. And our heart has to stay open in the midst of all of this.
Yes.
Because it could be easy to make us, to cause us to create hate against one another that only serves somebody else's purpose.
Correct. Well said. Well said. Yep.
Yeah, I didn't want to overstate on your behalf, but that's some of the stuff that I just took away from what you've been sharing, and also the book.
I never thought that we would see a repeat of what happened back then now. Like the adage is, let us never forget. And now this is going on, and I'm telling you, sometimes I feel like I'm in the twilight zone. I just cannot believe this is going on, and yet I do. I mean, what happened in Israel and how they kind of melted into everything else about the Jews and the Zionists, and it becomes so kind of convoluted.
It's confusing for people.
Yes. And you're getting very low informed people out there on the street that they just follow. I call them sheeple. They're sheeple. They just follow. And they don't know. They say, well, they're protesting, so I want to be part of it. They don't even know what they're protesting about.
Well, and when we don't know history, we just keep doing the loop, right? If you go back hundreds and multiple hundreds of years, you can see evidence of this type of thing, right? Yeah. Not necessarily identical, but we do owe it to ourselves to know our history.
Absolutely. It's critical. And they're not teaching it. The schools just aren't going into the history, especially European history and what happened in World War II. They're really not going into that. So these kids don't know. They just don't know.
Why do you suppose that is, Michael?
I just don't think the education is really focused on the past as much as it should be. And if they are, they're focusing on more of the American history. They're not really going back into the European era. And we're all ancestors coming from somewhere else. So I think they're making a big mistake by not focusing on what happened to get like the immigrants coming over here in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, the Statue of Liberty and, give us your poor. I mean, that's the fabric of the United States. It comes from over there. So. Yeah.
So I'm excited to have you on the podcast, and I hope that as we go forward, we can help you in other ways as well.
Thank you.
Because I know that it's brave to put yourself out there, and I'm so glad that you're being welcomed so openly and that people are wanting to hear more. So say someone wants to have you come and speak to their group or on their podcast. What is the best way to reach out to you, Michael?
They can reach me through my website. And by the way, my book can only be ordered off my website. I'm not in Barnes & Noble or Amazon. I'm doing this all by myself. I go to the post office every day, and I fill the envelopes with books, and I go there every day to send out the books. I mean, it's just unbelievable. But, and I autograph each book. Each book I autograph. And I've sold thousands of books. I mean, I'm autographing every book. So they go to thevowalovestory.com. They could also visit me on Instagram and Facebook. But if they want to set up, I call a book talk with Michael Ruskin. I'd love to be in front of an audience and telling them exactly what I'm telling you. And sometimes I'm watching these people. I have a PowerPoint presentation, and I'm watching the faces out in the audience. And when I talk about it, their eyes just kind of light up. They just cannot believe what I'm saying. And, I show them some of the things that happened. It was just amazing. But I love speaking about it because that's why I'm here. So, yes, if they want to reach me for a presentation, a book talk, they can reach me through my website or through Facebook.
And I want to point out that even though the Hollywood producer didn't think there was enough money to produce something for you. That's actually not true. You could crowdfund this. And yeah,
we're talking about that right now.
Yeah.
But it's an important topic, Sarah, and I believe a lot of people would benefit from a film or a documentary or a mini series. I sent a book to Steven Spielberg 2 days ago. But, there's so many books out there on the Holocaust. I don't know if they'll pick that up or not, but listen, you got nothing to lose. But my bottom line is to try to get this book into the hands of as many people as possible so they know my parents, they know what happened, and the spiritual part of the power of love and the strength of the human spirit, because that was the only reason they stayed alive. It was
and you're here now as a result of that. Right,
exactly. If anything had changed on their journey, I wouldn't be here right now. Everything had to fall into place.
I just love how this whole process has brought you to know your parents better. I think all of us, we don't ever see our parents fully, but I know of that era, people, they didn't talk about what was going on with them.
No, they didn't. Also, the veterans of that time, but I mean, they would not, rarely did they ever, well, I'll tell you one thing though, my mother was very protective, but at the same time, I would rarely bring up anything that happened back then because I didn't want to open up the wounds, but they were not volunteering information and I just never knew. I will tell you, being raised by Holocaust parents, she was extremely protective. I mean, she would literally walk me to school in the morning when I was very young, and she would wait in the schoolyard at 3:00 and get out of work early to walk me home. And it was embarrassing because my friends were walking with their playmates and I'm being taken home by my mom.
Totally understandable though, right?
Yeah. Well, and also I spoke Yiddish until I was 7 years old. I would go into the classroom. They thought I was from Mars. They didn't know what I was talking about.
What's up with this kid?
Yeah, I can't even speak English. He's speaking Yiddish.
Oh, man. Michael, thank you for spending time with us on the podcast. I'm
Sure.
going to give you the last word. So what word of advice or encouragement would you give young people today who are surrounded by all of this?
You have to have faith in what is happening. You've got to connect to God and to your own power and own strength and love to really stand up against people who are not knowing. These are people that don't understand. And I believe that we have to stand together as a people to actually fight back against those that are not wishing us well. But the bottom line is the strength, as I mentioned before, it is that strength of the human spirit and that love is what can overcome any circumstance or any hardship. But you've got to believe, you got to have faith, and you have to have love of yourself too.
So listeners, as you know, I want you to go to the show notes. You can connect with Michael there. We'll have all of his connections. Check out the book. It's a good read and share it with your friends. And if you happen to know Steven Spielberg, give him a thumbs up that Michael sent him a letter because it's a story that needs to be told.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
You've been listening to the No Labels, No Limits podcast with best-selling author, change agent, and strategic business coach, Sarah Box. You can grab the show notes and find out how to work with Sarah at sarahbox.com/No Labels, No Limits podcast. We'd love this podcast to reach as many people as possible. Please remember to rate, leave a 5-star review, and share the podcast with someone you think would get value from this conversation. Till next time, keep taking those daily action steps to align your purpose to your principles and achieve your goals in business and life.